Good evening, everyone present here. So, we are here for week 11 live session for the NPTEL course on urban utilities planning, water supply, sanitation, and drainage. The course instructor is Dr. Devapratim Pandit. He is an associate professor at the Department of Architecture and Regional Planning at IIT Kharagpur. And I'm Monica S. I'm a research scholar at the same department. So this course has two major streams of interaction. One is the weekly live sessions that we have, such as this session from every Monday 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. You can raise your hand, unmute, and raise your query once each question is done, or when I prompt you after a set of questions. Or the questions can also be posted in the chat box. There is also a discussion forum for the course where any questions related to the live sessions as well as actually the course conducted can be raised. They'll usually be addressed soon after, right? So, okay, sorry, my bad. It's actually not sewer appurtenances, right? So, week 11 recap. We basically had lecture 51 focusing on sewage disposal and treatment in India. There was an introduction given with a few case studies. Lecture 52 had natural methods of sewage treatment and what are the consequences when is it allowed, etc. The next three lectures focused on artificial sewage treatment, which involved primary treatment, secondary treatment, and some advanced methods were covered. Right. In this live session, we'll basically be looking at a few questions corresponding to week 11's assignment from the previous run of the course. Right. So please note that there are quite a few minor errors throughout the session. Also, since Ms. Supriya has queries in the current session, let's start with that actually. Right. So this was the original planned one. Ms. Supriya, you said that you have a query in question number 12, right?
Yes, yes. You
What is the
just explain
okay, so I'll just
biological treatment of sewage and what it is, and I think with
okay,
options also you can
okay. I
explain.
think
Don't tell the answer.
this will come back to it because I told you na I might have one question which is close to this, so we'll come back to this at that question. But let's go to question number
Yeah,
18. So
yeah, okay.
here basically they're talking about how treatment by dilution is allowed in which of the following cases: A. Sludge bank formation, B. Insufficient depth, C. Unharmful to aquatic life, and D. Backflow to sewers. So the question is actually originally asking uh, by dilution is just one option, right? Like how you can address sewage. But if certain things happen, you're not allowed to go for treatment by dilution, right? But if they like you need to meet certain conditions, only then can you allow treatment by dilution. I'll give you one major option that doesn't meet the requirement. For example, take D, backflow to sewer. So if there is backflow to sewer, which is, if you remember, let me just, if you remember, say there is a water body, right? And you have a sewer from the city, sort of draining sewage, right? Sewage in. However, if the water level sometimes rises and there is going to be backflow into the sewer, then you actually cannot have dilution, right? Treatment by dilution. Treatment by dilution is basically when you have a large water body and you just mix sewage into the water body and it's so vast, or the movement of water is so high that it will not affect the concentration of sewage in it will not affect consumption or will be sort of taken care of, right? Does that answer your issue, Supriya?
Yeah, backflow of sewer, I
So that doesn't
understand.
work, right? So what
Yeah.
do you think the answer should be? Like, what do you think needs to? What is the basic condition of the four answers given that will allow treatment by dilution?
Okay. Harmful to aquatic life.
Yeah, it basically shouldn't be harmful
Unharmful.
to aquatic life. If you notice, if there is backflow, if there is a sludge bank formation, you cannot allow it. Insufficient depth, you cannot allow it. And if it is unharmful to aquatic life, you can allow treatment by dilution. So that's how you are supposed to look at the answer. And backflow to sewer, again, as I explained, you cannot allow it. Is that clear?
Okay, so unharmful to aquatic life is the correct
Yeah,
answer
yeah,
as
that is the correct answer. Yes.
okay, okay. Sludge bank formation, can you explain?
So sludge bank formation is when there is too much sedimentation of sludge. So instead of again, it's when there is incoming sewage into the water body. So say this is the water body, and let's go for some bad color. So say there is incoming sewage into the water body. If the water flow is very low, if the movement of water is very low, it will start forming
Okay.
sludge, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But because of
understood,
this
understood.
formation, there two things. One, the capacity of the water body reduces, but it also can lead to anaerobic processes, which means the water body will start stinking very soon. So that is why you cannot allow it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So let's go to the questions from the previous assignment. Question number one: what is sewage sickness? A, it is septic sewage being applied to soil having a high infiltration rate affecting underground water sources. B, water getting unfit to use due to continuous disposal of sewage in water bodies. C, health complications in sewage workers due to continuous exposure to unsafe conditions. And D, soil pores get clogged during sewage farming, leading to anaerobic conditions. Any answers?
It's D. Soil pores get clogged during sewage farming, leading to anaerobic
Okay,
condition.
okay. Anybody else? Okay, that's the right answer. Most of these questions are going to be theoretical, so let's keep. So the answer is when soil pores are continuously decreased and it gets clogged by the deposition of soils, right? So what happens is because of the lack of pores, air will stop circulating and anaerobic conditions prevail, and there will be a production of hydrogen sulfide. So the answer is D. All right. Moving on to the next question. Identify the type of natural method of sewage treatment. So, any responses?
Reason for A.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else in the chat box? Okay. We've got another A, region furrow. But yes, that is the right answer. So, if you notice from the slides also, region furrow is given. You can see the image right here. It is basically land plowed deep into 30 centimeter furrows leveled into plots and subplots. They are enclosed by dikes forming ridges and furrows in the subplot, right? So essentially, it looks like this. So please keep in mind that actually furrow irrigation or ridge and furrow irrigation is not a term that is specific to sewage treatment. It's actually a very common irrigation term, right? However, we can use this form of irrigation to use to do sewage farming, right? So that's ridge and furrow. Flooding is basically if the crop is basically located in the water, right? And you flood the entire crop. So this is permissible in certain crops. For example, rice cultivation basically starts off like that, right? And then lagooning is not actually a natural method of sewage treatment. It's a part of the sewage treatment process. Yes, but essentially you construct a huge reservoir. However, it's an indirect one. So if you notice, it's like water is detained for a period and then the water is taken out, and this sewage, the sludge that is built up, will be used in farming. So that's how lagooning comes into the picture. And managed turf is actually just yet another term for spray irrigation, right? So if you it's basically, so anybody who's familiar with uh, any kind of sports, you have the turf, right? So that's sort of managed and very properly maintained. The growth is not really allowed to go beyond a certain level. So the level of grass is very maintained very strictly. So that's a turf, right? So managed turf is not really directly applicable, but even in this context, we can use sewage treatment for managed turf, but managing part becomes difficult. So only the underground, if you remember from the slides, I don't have the slide here. There are methods where you have underground pipes carrying sewage. Only that can be used for managed turf, right? But currently the answer is A, written for it. Moving on to the next question. The processes involved in the aerobic type of biological sewage treatment are A. Hydrolysis, bioreduction, biosynthesis. B. Glycolysis, hydrolysis, bioreduction. C. Hydrolysis, biooxidation and biosynthesis. And D. Glycolysis, hydrolysis and biooxidation. Any responses? Okay, so let's go to the so right now we are actually particularly talking about the aerobic type of biological sewage treatment, right? In essence, there can actually be two types of biological sewage treatment. So one is the aerobic metabolism and the other is the anaerobic metabolism. However, in the slide you can see these three processes, right? Hydrolysis, bioreduction, and biosynthesis. There is a minor error in this slide. This is actually biooxidation. Please take note of this. If you note it here, it's actually given biooxidation and autooxidation. But in the chart itself, there is a minor error. So please be aware of this. So in case of the aerobic process, we have these three mechanisms, the three processes going on. One is hydrolysis, right? Hydrolysis. The second is biooxidation, and the third is biosynthesis, right? And in the case of anaerobic process, we have hydrolysis, bioreduction, and biosynthesis. Just be mindful of this. So the answer is actually C: hydrolysis, biooxidation, and biosynthesis. So these are the processes involved in the aerobic type of biological sewage treatment. Any queries regarding this?
No.
Okay. So just take note of this correction, right? Moving on to the next question. Which statements is or are incorrect about the biological treatment process? A. Biological sewage treatment involves aerobic or anaerobic microorganisms to decompose the organic and inorganic particles of sewage. B. Biological sewage treatment involves activated sludge process, sequencing batch reactor, and membrane bioreactor. C. Nitrogenous compounds are released during anaerobic process mostly. D. Bioreduction of soluble organic matter results in the release of hydrogen sulfide, methane, water, ammonia, and energy. And E. Methane production is achieved by aerobic process. Any responses? Okay, let's look at each one of the statements, right? So, first of all, the first statement is biological sewage treatment involves aerobic or anaerobic microorganisms. So, that part is correct because why we have two mechanisms, right? Aerobic and anaerobic. The same organisms, some of them might be able to, but we do have a set of organisms that sort of fundamentally are involved in aerobic uh, process, and the others are anaerobic microorganisms. So these two are fine to decompose the organic and inorganic particles of sewage. So this is where the issue comes in. Both of these are actually only going to act on the organic particles of sewage, right? The inorganic particles cannot be processed by microorganisms. So biological organisms are allowed to consume the organic matter, right? They cannot deal with inorganic particles of sewage, which means A is one of the incorrect answers. Correct? Right. B, we'll go on to the next slide. We'll consider it later. Let's move on to C. Nitrogenous compounds are released during anaerobic process mostly. So we saw this. If you notice, they are actually released mostly during aerobic processes. I mean, at the end of the day, you might end up calling ammonia also as nitrogenous compound, but uh, we are primarily talking about nitrates and nitrates, right? So they are released mostly during aerobic processes. So C is also an incorrect statement, right? Then we have D. Bioreduction of soluble organic materials results in the release of hydrogen sulfide, methane, water, ammonia, and energy. Right. So, if you look at this part, we actually have methane, yes, water, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and energy, as well as other things. But essentially, this point is correct, right? And the fifth statement is methane production is achieved by aerobic process. If you notice the compounds that are being produced here, it's actually not. Methane is produced in the anaerobic process, right? So this is also an incorrect statement. So as of now, A, C, and E are incorrect. Let's look at D. Biological sewage treatment involves activated sludge process. Yes, if you look at it from the slides. Sequenced batch reactor, yes, it's part of the list, and membrane bioreactor. So this statement is also correct about biological sewage treatment. So the answer is actually A, C, and E. Right? In A, inorganic particles is the problem. In C, it's actually produced mostly during aerobic processes. And E, methane production is achieved actually by anaerobic process. Right? Any queries?
No.
All right. So these are particular things that you basically need to notice while you're reading through the statement. I mean, something as big as this statement, I would have also probably missed the organic and inorganic part. I'll be concentrating on the aerobic and anaerobic microorganisms part, but please be mindful of this, right? Moving on to the next question. Identify the curves in dissolved oxygen versus time plot, right? So, what is A, B, C, and D? Uh, any answers?
C option.
Okay, we have one response C. Okay, so you are almost correct, Ms. Supriya. So let's look at the chart, right? So A is this equilibrium saturation DO concentration, right? So that basically talks about what is the regular concentration of oxygen when nothing is happening, essentially when water is normal, and what is the amount of oxygen that basically is in water during that time, right? And B is the amount of dissolved oxygen that is going to be there in water. So this is the point of release of uh, whatever sewage into the water body, right? So initially there is a decrease in dissolved oxygen and then there is an increased, right? So this curve represents the dissolved oxygen. C is cumulative oxygen addition, slope of this line. So what is happening here is, and D is cumulative oxygen depletion, right? So amongst the answers here, equilibrium DO concentration is correct. B oxygen sag curve is correct, but C is actually reoxygenation curve. You see, cumulative oxygen addition, right? And D is the BOD curve. So this is D. So why is this the BOD curve? Essentially, it's representing the oxygen depletion, right? So the oxygen demand BOD will be directly proportionate to the amount of organic matter that is going to be present in water. And when is the amount of organic matter high? As soon as the sewage is essentially entering into the water body. So because of this organic matter, oxygen starts getting consumed into its breakdown, right? So that is why we see this dip in oxygen. However, beyond a point, it starts improving again because the amount of oxygen that is being consumed in the water versus the rate of replenishment. So when there is a water body, there is water being consumed here, but there is replenishment from the atmospheric pressure, right? So due to contact with atmosphere. So there is a level of replenishment also. So beyond this point, what happens is the amount of oxygen being consumed in this breakdown of organic matter is less than the amount of replenishment happening. So oxygen starts increasing. So this is the replenishment rate, right? Or the reoxygenation rate. This is reoxygenation. And BOD keeps decreasing because organic matter is essentially either settling down or it's being processed by organisms or one or the other. So the answer is actually D. So A and B were right, but C is the reoxygenation curve. So over time, oxygen will keep increasing and BOD will keep decreasing. Right? Any queries?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. I hope that's clear and it will help you remember the curves as well. Right?
Yeah.
So, next question. Mark the correct statements for sewage treatment. A. Primary clarification involves the settlement of suspended solids. B. Secondary clarification involves removal of slimy organic substances through anaerobic process. C. Sludge digestion involves the digestion of organic and inorganic sludge from primary and secondary clarifiers. The grit removal process involves the removal of coarse inorganic particles, and E is screening process involves the removal of large sized floating material through gratings. So we need to mark the correct statements in all of this. Let's actually go ahead and look at the statements, right? So the first statement is about, okay, I didn't include, let's just do something. I'll include the statements here for ready reference, right? Otherwise it's difficult to. So, first statement regarding primary clarification involves the settlement of suspended solids. Yes, it does involve the settlement of suspended solids. It actually happens right after the screens and grid chambers phase. Right? So, and then the secondary clarification involves removal of slimy organic substances through anaerobic process. So the issue with this statement is, yes, secondary clarification does involve settlement of separating of settled slime, right? So that is fine. However, it's after aeration. It's not an anaerobic process. So which means this sentence is actually wrong, right? The third statement about sludge digestion. Sludge digestion involves the digestion of organic and inorganic sludge from primary and secondary clarifiers. So, again, sludge digestion actually is something that involves only organic matter. So, yes, it does involve both sludge from primary and secondary clarifiers. This part is fine, but this part, the inorganic sludge part, is wrong. Right? So, this statement is incorrect. The grit removal process involves the removal of coarse inorganic particles. Yes, so these are all coarse particles of sand, ash, and clinkers, eggshells, bone chips, such inorganic materials. Right. So the coarse part is important, and the inorganic particles part is also important. Right? And screening process involves the removal of large-sized floating material through gratings. Okay, so this is also correct. So the answer is actually A, D, and E. So in B, the issue is the anaerobic process part. It actually involves aeration. So it's like a secondary clarification. We'll have these aerators which sort of muddle the water and are involved in the like are used in secondary clarification. And sludge digestion may the issue is with inorganic sludge, so it only has organic sludge, so the inorganic sludge part is wrong. Therefore the answer is A, D, and E. Any queries regarding this? It's just a matter of
Option B, can you please tell me again?
option which one?
B. Why B is wrong? B for
So
Bombay, second
if you
one.
notice, the slide also mentions how secondary clarifiers are used for separating the settled slime, including microorganisms, after aeration. So it's actually an aerobic process. It's not an
Okay.
anaerobic process. Okay, so but this statement
Okay,
says
okay,
that
okay.
it's an anaerobic process. That's where the issue is. But yeah, otherwise the statement is correct.
All
It
right.
involves the removal of slimy organic substance. Right?
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. During sewage treatment, grit is removed from sewage by the process of A. Differential sedimentation, B. Precipitation, C. Stabilization, and D. Flocculation. Any answers?
A or C, I'm not sure.
Okay, okay. Any other responses? Okay, so the answer is in fact A, right? So it's actually mentioned in the slide also. It's grit removal involves the separation of from organic solids by differential settlement. So separation of inorganic materials from organic solids by differential sedimentation. So the principle is basically that there is a difference in the rate of sedimentation when it comes to organic matter and inorganic matter, right? Inorganic materials, especially the big chunks, what happens is if you have uh, even in say something, I don't know if this is a common process when we are sieving something, no, if you notice the larger particles sort of settle to one side, and then the smaller particles settle to one side. And that's how we do even everyday processes such as when you take rice and there are stones in rice, to remove them we sort of sieve them, right? This is something similar. So there is a difference in how, or which part of the tank the different materials are going to sort of settle down in. Sedimentation will happen. So for example, in this aerated chamber, what will happen is, say, the liquid flow is sort of in a helical pattern, right? So it sort of goes around like this. The smaller particles might end up being carried forward farther than larger particles. So the larger particles will sort of get trapped earlier, right? So this is the principle behind grit removal, that it's essentially different rates of sedimentation that are going to happen during the process, right? So the answer is actually A.
What is a stabilization? Can you explain, please?
Stabilization is when you want to enable the settlement of any form of solids, but that's not the underlying principle behind it, right? You get what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and stabilization also is used sometimes to sort of reduce the velocity of flow. So it's either during sedimentation we use stabilization, or even before adding to another water body. Say you are going to add water into a pond, you can't add the water at whatever speed you want to, right? You're going to disturb the local ecosystem. You'll probably add turbidity to the water. So stabilization ponds are usually used right before releasing the treated water, for example, into a water. So they have multiple uses, but that's not the underlying feature, right? Okay, so uh, in fact, stabilization is probably something that you'll see in plain sedimentation tanks, not at the grit removal stage, right? So if you notice,
Okay.
removal actually uses movement mostly, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. During sewage treatment, the
Yes.
coarse suspended solid particles that cannot be removed by screening, skimming, or grit removal process are removed by A. Secondary clarification, B. Chemical sedimentation, C. Plain sedimentation, or D. Activated sludge process. Any responses?
It's secondary or activated. Plain, it's not chemical. नहीं है. So maybe A or D. Secondary clarification, it is.
Okay. Okay. If you remember from the previous question, secondary clarification actually involves removal of slimy organic substances, right? However, currently
Yeah.
we are talking about coarse suspended particles, like they're solid particles. However, unfortunately,
Yeah,
they
of
did
course.
not get removed. Like, say the screen size is too big, somehow they got through the screen size. You understand screens, right? It's basically a mesh,
Yeah, yeah.
or a slotted
Yes.
thing. So they somehow got through this screen. So what is the first thing that we'll do to remove these? So secondary clarification will be much later. And activated sludge process is not
Plain
actually,
sedimentation.
yes, actually the answer is plain sedimentation, right? So you might think chemical sedimentation may also, it is suspended solid particles also being removed. However, immediately after this, so there is a sequence, right? So during sewage treatment, right after those that cannot be removed by screening, skimming, or grit removal will be removed by plain sedimentation. Those that cannot be removed by plain sedimentation will be removed by chemical sedimentation. And then we'll probably go for secondary clarification, right? And activated sludge process is actually a type of sewage treatment. So it's a sequence. It's a set of sequence of. It's a particular process. It's a sequence of steps that are involved. Right. It might also involve multiple stages. So that's not really a relevant answer. So you can see it here, right? So plain sedimentation is the answer. I hope the explanation is clear, right? So, in fact, during the entire sewage
Yes.
treatment process, if you notice, so as soon as the sewage comes in, also we have what we have organic matter in it, we have soluble particles in it, but we always go from the largest. At the organic matter stage, also you can have removal of something as big as plastic bags and water bottles, but what happens is it will end up overloading these systems further down the stage, right? So if you can remove these particles at the beginning of the process rather than at the end, might as well go ahead, and it will also help in the long term maintenance of all the equipment or all the pumps, motors, all the appurtenances involved in the process of sewage treatment. So it's good to remove the bigger particles earlier. So that's essentially the logic behind answering such questions, right? Okay, moving on to the next question. The dosage of coagulant required for the chemical sedimentation process depends on A. pH of sewage, B. BOD of sewage, C. nature of coagulant, D. flocculation time, or E. size of the tank. Any answers?
C, D, E, C option.
Okay, CD. Okay. Okay, if you actually look at the slide actually mentions pH of sewage, right? So the pH can actually influence the chemical
Yeah.
reaction that is happening in the container or in the unit. So pH is actually one of the options, right? BOD of sewage. BOD is actually not explicitly given, okay, but it's also there. So BOD is also a right answer. So I don't know why it has not been listed here, because it's going to influence what the degree of treatment desired. The temperature of sewage will also change according to BOD. The strength of sewage will also change according to BOD. So BOD is also one of the answers. Nature of coagulant is given. So which type of coagulant are we using? And flocculation time is given. So BOD is missing, right? However, none of the size characteristics will actually influence dosage. So, in terms of chemical sedimentation, what happens is there is a small particle and things start coagulating around it, right? So, these are the more important aspects of dosage determination than the size characteristics of the tank. So, in fact, strength of sewage will sort of, it can be a large amount of sewage but of low strength, and it can be a small amount of sewage with high strength, right? So the answer is actually D. A, B, C, and D. The characteristics of the tank are not really that significant. Any queries regarding this?
No.
And unfortunately, BOD is not mentioned, but please take that into consideration as well, right? So moving on to the next question. Self purification of water bodies involve A. Sedimentation, B. Aeration, C. Reduction, and D. Decomposition.
Decomposition
Any answers?
and ACD, not
Is
aeration.
okay, not aeration.
No, only A, matlab, not aeration. B option is wrong. A, C, D is correct.
Okay. Okay.
Option C.
Okay. Actually, if you look at the slides, we can see that sedimentation is there. Yes.
Uh,
Aeration is also there.
aeration is
Right. Aeration is there. Reduction is not given here. And decomposition is given. However, reduction is also an answer. Why? So, ideally, in the correct type of self purification process, so what happens if you look at this part? No current results in sewage deposits forming large banks and flow orders. So this part is the anaerobic part, right? Slow current leads to deposition of heavy solids, leading to anaerobic decomposition. These are the points pertaining to reduction. Reduction happens only when there is an aerobic reaction. However, if you notice it here, it's given here, right, by anaerobic microorganisms. The thing is, self purification in its good form or its allowable form will only involve sedimentation, aeration, decomposition, right, and probably absorption and all. But in it is actually possible that the self purification process is also having reduction. It might be harmful, but that is also called self purification process, right? So the answer is actually A, B, C, and D. Normally, all four are possible, but for a good process, matlab, for a process where the environment is not affected, A, B, and D are the only things that should be there. In fact, D shouldn't lead to reduction. So I think this sort of brings us back to the question number 12, right? If I'm not wrong. No, that was regarding biological treatment. Okay, so my bad. We'll come back to that later. Right? So the answer is actually D. Any queries in this?
no.
Yeah. Move on to the next question. Match the following and mark the option for the correct match. Which is the trickling filter, which is the chemical sedimentation tank, and which is the plain sedimentation tank? Any answers?
Option A.
A. Okay. P, Q, Q2 and R1. Yeah, you are actually right, Mr. Priya. That's the answer. So, plain sedimentation tank will not have any of these chemical inlets or anything. It will have a scraper, right? So, to remove the sludge and sort of put it back into the sludge sump. So, this will be there, but usually uh, it doesn't have any sort of aeration mechanism or anything, right? In chemical sedimentation tank, the most important thing to look for is the chemical feed. Otherwise, it's a normal sedimentation tank, right? So this sort of mechanism is similar to this is to enable the mixing of chemicals, and this is the scraper again, right? For scraping sludge. And then trickling filters are actually a type of attached growth systems. Attached growth system is when you have a surface on which you have um, bacterial or some kind of culture, microorganic culture, which helps in the filtration, right? So yes, your answer is right. So this is the trickling filter, chemical sedimentation tank, and plain sedimentation tank. Okay, moving on to the next question. Which statements are incorrect regarding sequencing batch reactor SBR? A. It combines all sewage treatment steps into one unit. Excuse me. B. It involves four phases of treatment, that is fill, react, decant, and idle. C. During the react phase, BOD is removed through the oxidation process. And D. It is effective for varying sewage flow patterns. Any answers? Okay, let's just consider each statement, right? So A, it combines all sewage treatment steps into one unit. So yes, SBR is a variation of the activated sludge process which combine all of the treatment steps and process into a single basin or tank. So it sort of reduces area requirement in the process. So A is correct. Right? And B, it involves four phases of treatment: fill, react, decant, and idle. As you can see, it actually involves five phases of treatment: fill, react, settle, decant, and idle. So this statement is wrong. See, during the react phase, BOD is removed through the oxidation process. Okay, before that, D, it is effective for varying sewage flow patterns, which is true. It is effective for low or varying flow patterns, which is true. Okay, and C, so during the react phase, BOD is removed through oxidation process. Yes, which is also true. Most of the BOD removal or reduction occurs in the react phase, and it occurs through an oxidation process. Why? Because you can see that there is aeration mentioned, right? So actually, only B is the answer. So none of the options are actually offering that. In the original answer key, they had mentioned that B and C are incorrect, but if I'm not wrong, only B is the answer. However, I'll run this by the NPTEL team as well. I mean, just in case I'm wrong, I'm missing something. But only B is the answer here. So please take note of this. Right? Any queries? I hope not. Okay, let's go on
No,
to the.
please go
Okay,
ahead.
okay. Thank you. Let's go on to the. I think probably this is the last question for the evening. So the question is: attached growth systems for biological treatment of sewage include A. Aerated lagoons, B. Moving bed biofilm reactors, C. Stabilization ponds, and D. Contact beds. Any answers?
Stabilization pounds.
Okay, so attached growth systems for biological treatment. So attached growth systems are like the trickling filters, right? You have a surface. I'm sorry, this is supposed to be a straight line. Sorry. You have a surface, or you have an inclined surface. Usually, it's inclined for better logistics, right? And you have some kind of culture growing on this, some kind of microorganisms, or sometimes even you can even see algae and all growing on this screen, and they end up aiding the process of organic matter removal. Some form of physical suspended or soluble particle filtration also happens, right? So the sewage is sort of passed through these, and the organic content is reduced because they interact with the sewage and help process the organic matter. So that's an attached growth system. In case of stabilization prawns, we don't really have such a surface and then attached growth with it. So okay, let's see what the answer is. If you look at the slide, it actually talks about how the main treatment takes place at the surface of the filtering media, right, where a bacterial film is formed. Okay, so the answer actually is, according to the key from the last year's assignment solution, is contact beds. So these are filtering media where beds where filtering media of 2 or 2.5 centimeter size, and they're made of broken stone and brick ballast, right? So the answer should technically be D. However, if you notice here, Moving bed biofilm reactors (MBBR) actually also advanced attached growth systems. They also involve the some kind of culture, some kind of microorganism culture that helps in, you know, uh, treatment of sewage. So the answer actually has two options that are applicable. So according to the key, they've given the answer as contact beds. I'll ask them to correct the options. Probably they didn't. They didn't realize they've given MBBR also. But MBBR is also an attached root system, right? So what are the other two options? If you notice, aerated lagoons, they've mentioned it here, right? So they are part of the activated sludge process where sewage containing organic matter is aerated in an aeration basin in which microorganisms metabolize the organic matter and a portion of the sludge formed is recirculated to facilitate bacterial growth. So what happens is there is no what to say, there is no surface on which the microorganisms are sitting, right? They're actually within the water itself, and whenever say some form of treatment is done, they take a small part of the sludge and reinsert it into the next batch of water, right? So it is sort of recirculated, so that the bacterial growth is kept stable, right? Because if you remove the sludge, you might end up removing all the bacterial content as well. So the that's where aerated lagoon. So if you this is a uh, typical aerated lagoon. If you see, you actually have these aeration happening, right? It basically introduces disturbance in the water. So there are fans of sort that expose the water body or the pond to aeration. And when it comes to stabilization ponds, you can look at it here. These are artificial open flow through earthen basins where the organic matter of sewage is stabilized, meaning the movement is controlled, right? The detention periods ranges from a few to several days, right? So these can also be used in biological or secondary treatment. But what happens is essentially from the basin itself, the water effluent is taken care of, sort of like a natural process, but in an artificial basin, right? So the answer is actually D and B. So again, please take this into consideration. The previous key actually doesn't mention this part. Alright. So that's all for today. Now let's go back to the question that you had a doubt in, Ms. Supriya. Identify the statements that stay true for the biological treatment of sewage and choose the correct answer from the options given below. So this is talking about biological treatment of sewage. Yes. So P, it helps to remove the BOD of sewage. Okay. Biological organisms do not help in dissolving organic matter. Okay. Oxygen molecules are taken by breaking organic matter in anaerobic process or aerobic process. So biological treatment actually has both of these, right? Okay, you are basically saying the options don't reflect this. Is that the query, Miss?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll ask them to reconsider this. I can see what the issue is. Right. Technically, there can be a aerobic mechanism also, anaerobic.
Yes.
Uh,
PRS, from my point of view, the correct answer is.
okay, their
Yeah.
justification might be that so the supply of oxygen in aerobic process actually comes from outside, right? Take a look at the slide. It's called oxidation, right? If you notice here, so the supply of oxygen is actually from outside, correct? But in the anaerobic process, the supply of the oxygen is taken by breaking down. So the anaerobic organisms take the oxygen from the organic matter itself. So maybe that's what they're trying to talk about, right? Oxygen molecules are taken by breaking organic matter in the aerobic process, and probably that's the difference here.
So R is incorrect.
No, oxygen molecules are taken by breaking organic matter in the aerobic process might be incorrect. They could, I mean, there is a bit of ambiguity in the statement, but so breaking organic matter is how oxygen molecules are attained by in anaerobic process. You don't have any other presence of oxygen, right?
Yeah.
So S might
Yes,
be
yes. Ace is
huh,
wrong. Yeah, you are
yeah,
right.
yeah. So uh,
Because
S
oxygen is already present for
yeah
aerobic.
present. So they
So
might not take the oxygen, which is why you can actually see the production of CO2, H2O. So much oxygen is actually being released also. If they require it for breaking down, they won't be releasing it, right? So these are the oxygen from the organic matter itself. So
correct.
is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So are there any other general queries or anything?
No, no, no. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Ashwin, Ms. Devasena. Okay, all right. Okay. Fine then. I think,
So thank you.
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for joining. I'll see you in the next week. Any other queries, please raise it in the upcoming, in the discussion forum. And I think next week is the last session. So, yeah, see you all soon. Thank you.